Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. My name is DeLucia, and I am the Senior Assistant Director of Graduate and International Admission. We'd like to thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join the Office of Graduate Admission and our wonderful graduate program faculty and their lovely guests for today's hot topic webinar called Current Issues and Dilemmas in Human Resources, Designing the Organizations of Tomorrow. First, I'll tell you a little bit about the purpose of today's event, and then I'll hand things off to our moderator and Industrial Organizational Psychology Program Director, Dr. Joshua Feinberg, to introduce tonight's panelists and facilitate this valuable discussion. So tonight's webinar invites prospective graduate students to engage with faculty and industry professionals in discussions around trending topics in their respective fields. The event gives you the opportunity to learn more about our graduate education, career opportunities, and challenges in the field of IO psychology. I invite you to take part in the conversation by answering the polls that'll pop up on your screen occasionally. I'll put one up now. It's sort of a welcome poll. Um, so you can also write in the chat throughout the event and submit questions using the Q&A function. And please feel free to stick around at the end to see those questions answered and learn a little bit more about our industrial organizational psychology program. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Dr. Feinberg completed his undergraduate studies at Cornell University and went on to get his MS and his PhD from Rutgers. And here at St. Peter's University, he is the professor of psychology and the director of our industrial organizational psychology program. So I'll pass it off to Dr. Feinberg. Take it away.
All right. Yes. Welcome, everybody. Really excited to be here. One of my passions is, seeing how psychology could really affect our everyday lives and institute change. It's one thing to kind of learn in a textbook and sit in your classroom, but to see psychology in action for me is always exciting. And I hope it's exciting for you. As Liz mentioned, I'm the director of the graduate program in IO psychology at St. Peter's. We have a Master of Science, we have a Master of Arts. It's a wonderful online program with amazing students, amazing graduates, one of which is on our panel, but we'll get to that in a second. It's really been an enlightening experience for me. I learn as much from the students as I hope they do learn from me and their other professors. I certainly could talk more about the program on and on, but I really want to get to the meat of today's topic, thinking about really issues in HR. Certainly that is one avenue that a lot of our students end up going. A number of our current students recently switched into HR while in the program, which is exciting. They may have been here, there, or where else, but they recently got jobs in HR. We have people who have been in HR who have joined our program. So there's definitely a strong connection between IO psychology and human resources. So with that being said, I want to introduce relatively briefly our amazing panel. I'm going to start off with, in no particular order, just what I have in my notes in front of me, Patty Principe, who is a recent graduate of our program, a real pleasure to have in class and to kind of learn with and from. She is currently the head of people and culture in North America at the Live Kindly Collective. She's worked in various sectors, including recently at Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield, where she was the HR director, and she's worked in a number of Fortune 500 well-known companies, and she has expertise in engagement, talent management, cultural development, leadership development, diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm sure the list goes on and on. So welcome, Patty, to our panel. I'll introduce all three, and then maybe they could, say something. If I miss something, I apologize. Michelle DeLucia, I had the pleasure of meeting this past summer, so relatively recently. She is currently the Chief Human Resources Officer at Advanced Disaster Recovery. She's, again, also has years of experience in all kinds of companies, from startups to Fortune 100 companies, expertise in transforming organizations, improving business performance, talent management, organizational development, leadership, and change management. And so welcome, Michelle. Pleasure to have you on the panel. And finally, our third panelist is Dr. Preston Lindsay, who has been teaching classes at St. Peter's in the business program in the graduate business. We're very excited to have him teach a course with us in the winter trimester. So, any students who are looking to join our program, or I know there's some current students who certainly might be enrolling in the program, very, very excited to have him, come over to the psychology side. His background and education is in IO psychology. He is the president and CEO of the Lindsay Group, his kind of consulting firm. And the mission of the Lindsay Group is to provide anti-oppressive, anti-racist organizational development services, transformational and radical system change. And I know in talking to Dr. Lindsay, a real passion for psychology, scientific methods, right? Bringing kind of that scientific knowledge into the workplace. And so we're really excited to have all three panelists. I don't know, DeLucia, maybe we should, let's go around. Patty, why don't you, if you want to start off sharing a few words about what you do, just to kind of give people a sense of kind of what your professional experience is about.
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me to join. I was missing, as Dr. Feinberg said, I graduated recently over the summer and was missing school. So this is great to see all the emails from St. Peter's. As Dr. Feinberg said, I'm currently the head of people and culture for the Live Kindly Collective. And if anyone is Googling that, there's sort of two things that we're responsible for. You'll most likely find the media link. And so it's just about eating a vegan lifestyle living a vegan lifestyle. But I'm responsible for the consumer products. So there's 5 vegan products that are being launched in the United States or have been launched in the United States. I think you touched upon all of my experiences within the human resources function, and really attending and graduating from St. Peter's has rounded my experience, sort of knowing what the drivers were for motivation and the social science, and having a deep appreciation for that. Working either with my peers across the companies I worked for, or hiring professionals like Dr. Lindsay to help us sort of execute, knowing the science behind that, and learning that over the past 18 months has been just phenomenal. So I'm thrilled to be here and share some of my experiences, because I still consider myself a student for life. So thank you again.
All right, great, Patty, thank you. Michelle, why don't you share a few words with us as well?
Thanks, Josh. So I'm currently, as Josh said, the CHRO for Advanced Disaster Recovery, ADRI. Super busy now because we specialize in emergency services. So in New Jersey, right, from the flood, from the hurricane, we've had, I think in day one, 337 calls on a waiting list just to get help. We still have that waiting list pretty deep in it. I've been coordinating, trying to get help throughout the country, getting companies similar to ours to come help us. So I had a company from California to help, Chicago, somebody from Chicago came. Right now, it's hiring people is our biggest challenge. And that's what I'm really working on, is trying to find people to who wants to learn this trade and either be a carpenter or someone, a tech, to help with water mitigation, lead abatement, or mold remediation. I met Josh, as you mentioned, in June or August, and I called him super excited about this program. I really wanted to go into this program. And then I started this, and after a week or two, so in pursuing the degree, again, this education, because I've been in HR for 20 years. I know the processes. I know how to get working with people, understanding people, what drives them. That's a huge deal in HR today, right? I think anyone, I don't want to say anyone, but I think a lot of people can be successful in HR doing the processes, but being able to connect and understand people is really huge today.
Thank you, Michelle. A pleasure, as always. Dr. Lindsay, why don't you say a couple words, kind of, share what you do?
Sure. Greetings, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. And to my fellow panelists, you all are dope. Thank you for the work that you do, because it's important. The organizations, your missions are incredibly important. So I just wanted to name that. And it's an honor to be in this space with you and all of the rest of you who are here, who have taken time to be here. Thank you. I just want to name that I am joining this space from the unceded ancestral land of the Anacostans, also known as the Greater Washington, D.C. region. So that's where I am, and naming Indigenous land is important to me. I am Preston Lindsay. I'm an organizational psychologist with a specialization in organization development practice, with a deep respect and appreciation for the tradition of multicultural, anti-racist OD practice. I have over 10 years of applied experience, both as an external consultant and organizational leader. I've led a number of organizations, both corporate and nonprofit. And I have facilitated transformation for dozens of organizations for the purpose of helping organizations to become more multicultural. And so the transformation always goes to not just serving the business needs of an organization, but supporting the very moral and necessary outcomes of D&I for organizations, which is absolutely important, as we are, of course, all living in a world that is in a society that is certainly affected by the circumstances of what is the construct of white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. And so my work goes to utilizing applied psychology, organizational science to disrupt systemic oppression in organizational contexts. And so that's a little bit about me. I'm on faculty at a bunch of schools. I'm passionate about the investing in the, what I know, and mentoring emerging IO psychologists. I believe that IO psychologists and OD practitioners are the future. I believe that we have the answers, that we have the skills to make radical and transformational change happen, using everything that we know in the way of applied science. And I'm really excited to be here to talk a little bit more about what I'm passionate about, and to answer whatever questions may emerge. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to be here again. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's great hearing what people actually do, kind of professionally, and all the different components of the challenges that they are facing. And so that kind of brings us to the kind of larger topic at hand. We've had so many major shifts in kind of our work lives over the last couple of years, whether, of course, it's the pandemic and the kind of shift to virtual working, remote working, whether it's kind of social issues that have come to the forefront over the last couple of years, and kind of an increased focus in diversity, but more so in inclusion, the piece of inclusion, both. But I like that we've been talking more about inclusion in our vernacular, and not just the diversity piece. So what I really want to do is kind of keep it broad at first and open it up to the panelists in terms of what what is the big challenge facing the workforce today from an HR perspective? And what tools do we think we can bring as professionals, as people with interest or backgrounds in IO psychology to kind of tackle that challenge? So Patty, I'll start with you. We'll kind of keep that order. What do you see as the kind of big challenge that we're facing today?
Sure. So I think that before I do that, I am so excited, Dr. Lindsay, that you called me dope, because I'm going to tell my teenagers that, because I don't think I don't think they would use that word in my description, but I agree. I'm honored to be here with you, Dr. Lindsay and Michelle. So I think, right now the list is endless, right? So, it was almost, dare I say, and just give me permission to get to the end of my sentence, dare I say, was it a little bit easier for us to sort of pick up our laptops and go home and work because we had no choice, and that was it. Lots of different emotions and, behavior and worry and, full crisis mode. But now as we return, there's so much employees have to think about, hybrid and vaccinations and kids, going to school, and should we wear a mask? Should we not wear a mask? Diversity, equity, and inclusion is important, but then how do you sort of keep those lines of respect for people that don't want to be vaccinated or that were vaccinated and don't want to wear them? And, so just the complexity and dynamic of that is sort of hard for us to put our mind, to it. I think everyone in the human resources or in the business world probably talks about, returning to work a couple of times a day. So I think those are a big thing. I'm glad to say that, the market in certain sectors is hot. And so there's a lot of activity and opportunities, and, in some other areas, I know businesses are still struggling. And so, I'm conscientious of that, but for certain opportunities, and so that's difficult, because now it's almost shifted to a worker. The employees will say to me, they'll even start with that, like, I just want to make sure this is remote, because if not, I don't even want to have the conversation with you. And so how do you sort of preserve that and attract the best talent, but then still keep collaboration and team? I was thinking about one of the first classes I took at St. Peter's was group dynamics. And so taking all of those theories and trying to apply it to continue to build high performing teams is so important. And so those are the kinds of things that come, to mind quickly. I think from a process standpoint, from an annual, I think my number one priority is always aligning with the business strategy and priorities. And so what, as a company, what direction are we facing, and how is the people function going to align and support that? So I'll pause, because I actually don't want to take up too much time, but happy to keep going and, turn it over to one of our other panelists, or come back to it if there's questions. And so just want to share that.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. And let me turn it over to Michelle for a second, because Michelle, you have a kind of similar professional background to Patty, even though you're, of course, working for kind of different organizations, but kind of the background in HR is similar. So do you have any kind of follow-up or agreement, disagreement, or you see other kind of challenges, or you want to take any points, kind of continuing points from Patty?
So the challenges that Patty mentioned are definitely all there, with COVID, the vaccinations. For me, my last position, or my last company, were manufacturing. So between manufacturing and my current company, there was no remote. We all went in. I was there. Everybody was there, 6 o'clock in the morning, and we had to manufacture. With this company, we handled disaster, so they remained open the entire time. They were doing cleanings. So coming back to work isn't really an issue so much for us. but I know that it is vaccinated, and a lot of our customers.
Oops, you're cutting out, Michelle.
Our staff to be vaccinated. So Biden's looking to push out that. What's that?
Oops, I was just, Michelle, you were cutting out for a second. I think you're back with us though. Oops, I think we may have, did we lose contact maybe?
It sounds like she did write in the chat session that she was having an issue. I think what she was saying is that she's not facing the challenge of returning to work, but she is facing the COVID vaccination, sort of requirements. President Biden, I'm reading the document, it gave an executive order, and what does that mean? And so I think that's sort of the gist of what I got, from her.
Can you guys hear me or no?
Oh, yeah, here we go. We got you, Michelle.
Okay, I turned my video off. Maybe that's
yeah, sure.
Because of bandwidth. So yes, thanks for recapping for me. So right now, my biggest struggle is in HR is acquisitions. So on top of everything that's going on with COVID and all the regulations, acquisitions, we're growing through acquisition and lots of mergers and acquisitions, going to the sites and trying to assess if it's a cultural fit, what the transition would be like, speaking to the employees who are all very nervous about these mergers and acquisitions. Lots of different ways of doing things, right? So as like this year alone, I had 3 acquisitions, and every company has a different mindset. How will they integrate with our employees and integrate with how we do things? So right now, that's a big challenge for HR at my job. And I'll just keep saying recruiting. I'll probably say that for the next hour. It's a huge issue, a huge challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I was just in my graduate IO class, we're starting to talk about kind of recruitment and kind of fit, and even the process of using what we know about psychology and identifying the knowledge, skills, abilities, and anything else to be able to identify the right candidates. And on top of that, I'm sure we have kind of supply and demand issues in terms of the workforce, but there's a lot really that IO Psych could really bring to the table in terms of that process. And then also thinking about what you're saying in terms for both Patty and Michelle about vaccinations. I've had a number of conversations with lawyers unofficially, but I'm really interested because now you're starting to blend legal issues, obviously with HR. That's always kind of a component of kind of trying to mesh the kind of psychological principles, the HR principles, plus the laws, which are ever evolving, which you make a policy today and the executive order, state order, federal could kind of turn things on their head, and dealing with that kind of change could be really hard for organizations and the employees therein. Dr. Lindsay, what's your take on the situation here?
So first of all, I appreciate all that's being said and shared. I'm not going to try to repeat what's been said because, of course, there are limitations on time. But I want to just affirm that I agree. And my focus is very much about psychological safety for all organizational members, especially for those members who represent oppressed identities. I think in this country specifically today, there are people of color who are especially worried about workplace health and safety. So I'm glad that we called it, we're having a conversation about that. Because while there are those who have the option to go into, to go remote, there are many frontline workers, nurses, sanitary workers, janitorial services, sanitation workers in the city. They represent a large population, of individuals of, historically marginalized identities, and they have to be on the ground, and they are vulnerable. And so that is, for me, this conversation is sort of inspiring what I thought that I would, call attention to anyway, which is, just how do we begin to discuss the issues that we know are so ever present with respect to, oppression, systemic oppression within organizations that manifest at every level and more often than not, right, affect people of historically marginalized identities. And I think that one of the major issues that I see with respect to how HR often responds to issues of systemic oppression is by prioritizing workshops and trainings. Let's uncover some biases and hope that this workshop is enough to train away racism. And more often than not, these challenges persist because these are systemic issues. And if we're looking at it from an open system theory, we're understanding that these issues are oftentimes, right, coming from forces coming from the external environment in the form of, ever-changing political landscapes and laws that are born out of, and policies that are born out of these, the political, spaces. And then we have all of these other structures that, allow for, the sort of structural violence that, again, Black and Brown, historically marginalized groups, LGBTQ folks and organizations are enduring every single day without, appropriate, I think, interventions that would address the issue at the root. Again, it isn't enough, I think, to have a series of trainings and workshops to address these issues. I think that an issue as complex as systemic oppression has to be a systematic response. And so I think that for me, as when I'm thinking about what organizational psychologists and OD practitioners, how we might respond to this is in a way that is, again, very strategic and very, evidence-based. And so I'm all about promoting, neuroscience-based approaches to changing behavior for long-term sustained behavior change. If we're talking about addressing the issue of unconscious bias, which is, important because these individuals who wield power in organizations oftentimes represent the dominant group, and their biases shape policies and affect in adverse ways, in many instances, in the lives of those who are, oftentimes disenfranchised and disempowered. Call these groups protected classes, or historically marginalized individuals of oppressed identities. However you identify these groups, these are people who have been pushed to the margins and are oftentimes not given space to be heard. For me, I think that when I think about what is the purpose of doing D&I or anti-racist work, which has become so performative for many organizations, I really think about what does it mean to, intentionally create spaces that would allow for the psychological safety of these individuals who don't get prioritized when we're thinking about opportunities, or are discriminated against when moving through selection processes, right? And so there's a lot of issues there, and that, clearly, again, the praxis of, the D&I praxis of, providing workshops is just not an appropriate response. And I think that we as, scientists and practitioners of, IO and OD, I believe that we have the skill set to facilitate or usher in even a kind of revolution. And this may sound more radical than it actually is, but I do believe that we could really help if we think about what is D&I think that we could help and influence in many ways D&I, the space of D&I, to reframe the way in which, change or responses to issue of systemic oppression, what those interventions look like. And so I think that, I'm kind of touching on all of these things because everything is so complex, right? And it's so everything is, if we're looking at it from a systems perspective, everything is kind of connected to everything. And so if we're talking about making a change at an individual level, we need to be thinking about what does it look like then to make radical changes at the system level to sustain change over time, the kind of change, behavior change that we want to see, which is ultimately what this is about. Because yeah, we have systems and structures that create incredible barriers that are very real for people of color, especially in this climate when we're dealing with issues of racial discrimination and organizational traumatization and different issues. But we have to understand how this, this is not just the issue of oppression is not just what is existing in the systems and structures. It's deeply entrenched in the psyche. And so I believe that, I'm not suggesting that education isn't important, that, we do the dialogic work and we move through processes that allow for resonance and empathy and connection across multiracial groups. That's important work, but it's not going to be the panacea. It will never be the panacea for this very complex issue of systemic oppression. And I think that when we're thinking about issues of like, how do we support our workers with, addressing this issue of COVID, right? We need to be mindful of what is the relationship between our workers, our Black workers, or our Latino workers to the healthcare system. Do they have appropriate resources to get what they need? Are their needs being met at an individual level? And if not, what can we do as an organization to support those needs? I think that it's important that organizations go a step further in their social responsibility to serving, again, historically marginalized groups with, meeting needs. And I think that, again, it's a very complex issue. And when we're talking about systemic oppression, and I'm not going to try to like touch on it all, even though I've here in a moment attempted to, because I just can't help it. But I think it's very important that, we have to begin thinking about who are the most vulnerable among us, who wields power and privilege, and what does it then mean to ensure that we are creating an organization that people who have been excluded for so long want to actually be included in, right? I don't want to be included into a racist, let me just say generally oppressive environment, right? Because I am an individual that exists at the intersection of Blackness and queerness. And so, there are many different barriers in the world that I come up against and have come up against every day. So I think that it's really important for organizations, particularly those who are in positional power and have incredible influence in HR, who have these, the knowledge that, lend to, making informed decisions about what policy should look like, and can make have incredible influence on how, leaders in other divisions of organizations within the organization can, really do the work of providing, strong D&I initiatives that are truly meeting the issues that are very real, right? Going beyond the trainings and coming and taking a more systemic approach, supported by evidence-based practices rooted in, IO psychology and OD. So I hope that is, I know that was a lot. I don't really know how to do things simply anymore, a consequence of being a system thinker, but yeah, that's what I see. What I see is the issue of systemic oppression and its prevalence and the sophistication of its evolution and how it is evolving over time in very sophisticated ways and continuing to create these problems that we've been dealing with for so long. And I just believe that we have the ability to do something about it. So that's
Absolutely.
my
No, thank you, Dr. Lindsay. And I'm going to, turn it to both kind of Patty and Michelle, and not necessarily thinking about the specific companies that you're working at. I won't put you on the spot there, but kind of thinking about HR in general, thinking about maybe, it could be kind of past organizations without naming anything. What's worked, what hasn't worked, and thinking about, the issues that Dr. Lindsay has brought up. What do you see out there that's the problem, and what could mindful HR professionals like yourselves, do to address, and this problem, you touched on problems from kind of all different directions, but what's your sense, Patty and Michelle, in terms of from that HR perspective?
I could go, but happy to have, take turns with Michelle. Dr. Lindsay, thank you for all of that, your passion and sincerity and thoughtfulness about all of that, really, struck with me and in my heart and in my soul, because I'm first generation Hispanics and my parents immigrated from Argentina. And that thinking, I didn't understand. So I grew up, everyone was Spanish and Catholic. So I thought that was diversity. I didn't meet the first, Jewish person or Indian person until I sort of went to college and, and then workforce. And so, that thinking of, I wrote an email today that, my goal is for the safety of employees. I should have written psychological safety. It would have been very, it would have fit in very nicely. But I think, yeah, that's our number one goal as IO psychologists, is to sort of, the reason that's so important is that if they're able to bring their whole self, then, their engagement and productivity source, and there's study after study after study that Dr. Feinberg made me read and Dr. Dan made me read. Or no, you didn't make me read. I wanted to read, but sort of pointed me in the right direction. So everything you said, rings very true to me. I think that, and it's interesting, Dr. Feinberg, you said that I'm glad the word inclusion is there. And, I think I'm getting to the age where, history is repeating itself, because, in the 80s and then the 90s, the big push was, let's get representation up. So hire every person of color out there, whether they could or couldn't do the job. And please, I'm just saying from my own experience, I don't want to offend anyone or any company or anything like that.
My view is not an untrue statement, so I'm with you.
Okay, yeah, I'm not saying it in any way. Maybe they were qualified or weren't qualified, but statistically speaking, that sort of didn't work. And then we went into the area of, you just have to tolerate people. Like, you don't really have to, you just have to like sort of be in the same room with them, and that should be okay, and that will help to, increase engagement. Which at the time, I think corporations and were selling that to us, and we all maybe thought it was a good idea. I'm not sure. And then now this thinking of like, I don't want to just hire people who are different to be, productive, and I don't want to just be in the same room with them. Like, I want to know what they know. And so I think probably all of us have read that story with the company who, I think it was Hyundai, launched in Colombia or Ecuador, and the name of the car was very successful here, was Nova, and it worked for us. But in Spanish, Nova means no go, Nova. Like, it's not gonna, why would you buy a car that says Nova? Like, it just doesn't make sense. And if you had somebody that perhaps spoke the language or understood that, that would have helped. So I think that theory of this psychological safety, and I strongly believe that training does help and to build awareness. But I think what IO psychologists and what this program has done for me is to really scrutinize and be more disciplined on what are the learning theories and motivation theories and group dynamic theories from a psychological standpoint that will work, versus just sticking everything, to the wall to see what sticks. And so, if, what Michelle said is, and most of us on the phone and here, you give us a process and a checklist, and we're going to do the best job that checklist says. I have no doubt in my mind, but knowing that it's going to stick and change behavior ultimately, and increase engagement, and grow leaders and meet our strategic priorities for whatever company you work for. That's what I think this program has done, not just for me, but for the students that I was in the class. So I think from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, you know, my daughter turned on a Hulu show. The Wonder Years is redone through the eyes of a Black family. And the sentence it started with could have been what we were experiencing right now within social injustice, a pandemic or some sort of flu. And so, you know, I think we just have to stay at it and have, you know, passionate leaders and continue to grow IO psychologists to help organizations really understand how to change behavior permanently, if you will.
Great. Yeah. And, you know, I think we, and rightfully so, we all want change to happen quickly, especially when it's, you know, we see social injustice. And hopefully we can, as IO psychologists, you know, get that change happening. And sometimes it's, you know, moves slowly with dedicated individuals like our panelists here, who, you know, before you know it, the change has occurred, and it stuck because you did things the right way. And you can reflect back and all of a sudden, wow, this really is the shift that I made may have been subtle in the day-to-day moment, but it really led to systemic change positive systemic change down the road. Michelle, you know, I want to turn that over to you in terms of additional thoughts, in terms of from the HR perspective in the field, thinking about, you know, organizations that you've seen work for in the past, what's working, what's not, in terms of, you know, psychological safety for employees.
Okay. And if I cut out, let me know. I'll just put it back. I'll take the video off. We've had in the past, I've worked in a company where we had a cultural competence committee. We had training brought in. It wasn't just a one-off training. It was like this whole process, which I was very fascinated by and I enjoyed participating in. I even like the name of it, Cultural Competence Committee. It started right from surveying the management team and leadership team and trying to get an understanding of what their cultural competence was. At the time, we didn't have a very diverse leadership team. It was male, white, age 50 and up, and kind of like a group think. So all had the same type of way of thinking about politics, about how to run the company, about people, right? So that was very eye-opening for them too, to see, you know, what the goal was to being more diverse and having more people on a leadership team, even if it meant, you know, not hiring people, but bringing people like director level and having them involved with the leadership team to add more value, more diversity, different way of thinking for the company. And so they start from that, going down to directors, down to managers, eventually down to employees, doing the surveys, doing small group meetings, giving people the feeling of safetiness, right? Working with a small group to share what are they seeing, what are they feeling. In the manufacturing site that I was at, it was very difficult to do this because we were 24/7, but we were able to pull people off and try to get everyone involved. And I found out, we found out that a lot of times they would not say each other's names. They would just call each other by their ethnicity. So there was a lot of things that was revealed through this surveying and trying to get people to open up and tell us what's going on so we could try to correct the problem. I mean, it's really something that I would like to take with me in every company I go to and do a cultural competence assessment and have that training constantly, reminding people, you know, because if you don't practice it, if you don't think about it, it just goes away. So you really need it part of your mission and your vision and incorporate it in your everyday. And you need it from the top down, sorry, because if they're not people aren't going to follow suit. with everything that Dr. Lindsay said that exists, but find out what's going on so that you can create that type of environment where, again, they feel safe, they share, and there's opportunities for everyone.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, it's a big issue, that we're facing. It's doing it right. It's also, how do you deal with resistance to change becomes a big part of it. And in IO psychology, there's plenty of studies looking at resistance to change that can inform us, but there might be some unique issues when you deal with such sensitive issues that are tied to the self and identity, right? That's different than just changing an office or just changing the structure of the leadership. But all excellent points. So I think we're, if I'm not mistaken, DeLucia, I think we're running towards the end of time. I don't know. Let me turn to you for a second. If you how you want to handle. Certainly we can do some closing thoughts from our panelists, or if you want to open things up. I'm not sure how you want to end it.
We can go ahead and do some closing thoughts, and then I'll jump into my presentation, and we'll do a little Q&A.
All right. So if you got, I know it's hard to wrap everything up in a brief closing thought. But why don't we tie it back to the kind of overall theme? So maybe again, just a sentence or two, and maybe hopefully we'll have some Q&A, and you can answer some more questions. So in closing thoughts, if we're thinking about designing the organization of tomorrow, which is part of the theme, where do we go? How are we doing that in 2 sentences? I know it's hard to do.
No, I would say, if I may, that it's really important that we begin looking at systems and what is the individual's relationship to systems. I think that it's important to understand that, again, like, awareness is not useless. That's never the argument from me. It's just that it's not sufficient. And if we're wanting to create spaces where people are performing optimally, that we have an organization in which individuals can show up their true selves, then we need to we need to create a set of conditions to allow that to happen. And it's going to take incredible work, and it needs to be, again, change happening at every level of the organization simultaneously, and it's continuous work. It's not implementing a strategic plan for D&I outcome, and then boom, there it is. It's all done, it's all gone, and we are all, exactly what we hope, what we're hoping for and what we're working towards. It is a lifelong process. So I would say that IOs are uniquely equipped to facilitate these change processes. So that's how I'll end. Yeah.
All right. Patty, why don't you go ahead, and then we'll finish with Michelle.
Sure. I think that, again, thank you for inviting me to discuss on this panel. And I love, the theory or the theme of it. And I think it's ongoing, and, for the students and for me and for the panelists, I think, it's such a complicated profession and area, and having this IO psychologist sort of framework and grounding is really what is important. And so having those theories and group dynamics, motivation, leadership, culture, and the self, which was probably one of the hardest classes I took, is really just grounding in that science, and being confident and having the courage to tell the leaders, like, this is why we're doing it this way, and really, leaning into that versus, like, the flavor of the day, or sort of what other leaders have done in other companies that may or may not have worked. So
thank you. And I just, before Michelle goes, I love that, kind of idea of like having the courage, because sometimes, the research takes you in a direction that maybe challenges even the leader's perspective. And when you have that scientific basis and you have that evidence behind you, that hopefully gives you the confidence to have that courage. Hey, it's not just it's not just me. Like I've got the proof to back it up. So that's great. Great way of putting it. Michelle, closing thoughts for us.
Well, something we didn't touch upon, and you mentioned, you said, if we're starting an organization, like what I would need like in 2 weeks. I live by I know you're not supposed to, but I do. The personality assessments and these like psychology assessments. So every job I've been at, we've had those assessments. And to me, like creating that team, like that dream team, or fitting the culture, or trying to get that understanding of how that person operates, whether or not they're a fit with their manager, with the rest of the teams. I think that's an important piece of psychology when creating the teams and recruiting.
No, that's great to hear, because I was just in a class meeting, we had been talking about, how do we kind of assess people, especially many people working different hours and, different shifts, and identifying, these kind of traits, knowledge, skills, ability, these other factors, being able to identify it, right? You'll be able to like peel back the curtain and see something that maybe on the surface is missing. So I think that's great that you have faith in those kind of tools that we as psychologists have developed, and that it's been kind of successful in your organization. So thank you. Thank you to the panelists. Hopefully we'll have some Q&A. But DeLucia, why don't you bring us home?
Sure. That was super awesome. I love listening into you guys. You guys have such interesting perspectives, and I'm so glad that Dr. Feinberg was able to invite you all. Such engaging guests to have these relevant conversations with. So thank you all so much for your perspectives. Now, I'll briefly, just in the interest of time, go over some details about the program with a presentation, and especially for our guests who are tuning into the recording, they're interested in this information, and then we'll dive right into a Q&A session. Now, that Q&A session, of course, can go over any admissions questions, but also and primarily questions for our guests and our panelists about the discussion that we just had. So if you do have questions, you can begin to put them in the Q&A section that should appear at the bottom of your screen, and so those will begin to start piling up while I go through this presentation, and then we can address them right away. So like I said, we'll go through this quickly. This is just from the Office of Graduate Admissions, going over some of the details of the program. So just quickly, why St. Peter's University, admission requirements, details about the program, some answers to frequently asked questions about the program, and then we'll dive right into that Q&A. So why St. Peter's University? Our Jesuit values and our commitment of cura personalis, which is essentially just the personal attention and care to the concerns of each individual student. And that comes in the form of our flexible schedules, because our students tend to be working professionals, and we want to acknowledge those your schedule. You likely have children, you likely have a full-time job, so we want to acknowledge that. And the personal touch of smaller class sizes allows us to pay attention to those to the concerns of each individual students. With individualized program experience, you have well-connected and engaged faculty. As you can see, Dr. Joshua Feinberg is connected to some awesome individuals in the field. And this program is available fully online, which further extends that flexible schedule notion. So admission requirements for this program differ between domestic and international students, but I realize that most of our attendees are domestic. So I'll go over those admission requirements, which include the official graduate application, which we'll be sending some follow-up emails with those details and links, as well as contact information to program directors and our office. That includes our, like I said, official graduate application, official transcripts that show evidence of a degree conferral, bachelor's degree conferral with a minimum of 3.0 GPA, 2 letters of recommendation, a personal statement, and your resume. So details about the program. This is a 36 credit hour program with 2 track options, as Dr. Feinberg mentioned earlier in the session. That's Master of Science and Master of Arts degrees. They're designed for both full-time and part-time study. And like I said before, it's a fully online program. So it's super flexible and super affordable at $695 for credit, which is super competitive for this sort of program. Among frequently asked questions is how long does one typically wait for to receive a decision? While we do let students know that they can wait up to a week or two for processing and review from the date that we receive all required materials, it can come much sooner and usually does. Along with that, is the GRE or GMAT required? No, it is not. None of our programs require GRE or GMAT, and the application is completely free. So we remove any obstacles in the sense of affordability with our applications. While there are no institutional grants or scholarships available for graduate students, we do encourage students to apply for the FAFSA and contact financial aid to review any and all options you have for funding your education. We also encourage students to contact their employers. Speaking of human resources, there are a lot of benefits available to employees by their employers. So make sure to check with your human resources offices. As far as application deadlines, there are no application deadlines. Applications are reviewed on a rolling admissions basis and should be submitted really as early as possible in order to be considered for the entry term of your preference. So now we jump right into Q&A, and I'll also be launching a little poll just so we can gather your ideas about our event tonight. In the meantime, please feel free to pose any questions that you have. So right now we have one question from Abby Locke. I'll read that aloud to our panelists. Are people with disabilities part of marginalized communities/identities? How are people with disabilities included in HR and industrial organizational psychology work? So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll spotlight any of the panelists who'd like to answer this question. And please let me know if I should repeat it for you all. Maybe I read it a little too quickly.
Okay. Michelle, I can't see you, but if you want to
Mi-
take it or if you want me to take it, it's up to you.
Michelle actually asked me to repeat it, so I'll go ahead and repeat the question. So, are people with disabilities part of marginalized communities or identities? How are people with disabilities included in HR and IO psychology work?
Okay, gotcha this time. This really depends on the line of work, to be honest with you. If it's, and it depends on the disability as well. I know when I'm dealing with someone who's asking or telling me they have or need an accommodation, right? I have to look at the job and what the accommodation or the request is and try to work with the organization on whether or not we can move ahead with either a hire or moving someone to a different position based on what their needs are. As far as like the IO piece of it, really I think having awareness, especially for the people that have to also work with the people, the individual, right? Because we don't want the person with the disability feel like they're getting treated differently or not pulling his or her weight, and we don't want peers feeling a different way either, like, oh, that person has a disability, so we can't give it to so-and-so, even if it's something temporary, like someone breaks their leg, there could be ill will from another person because, oh, I have to constantly go make copies because employee A can't walk. So I think IO is very important when dealing with these types of circumstances, because if there's no communication or training on what the workflow would be or where people's minds are, I think it's just a domino effect of people having a difficult time working with each other or feeling resentment. So I think it's really important. And it is a key factor when working with someone who has a disability.
I would say, is it all right that I contribute here?
Yes, of course.
I would say groups on the subject of individuals living with disabilities, acknowledging person-centered language here. I would say that individuals living with intellectual disabilities, individuals living with disabilities such as deafness, hard of hearing, mute, blindness, certainly are pushed to the margins and often ignored even. And this has had very serious consequences in the way of employment and being able to realize some independence, economic independence. And so I think that to the former part of the question, are individuals living with disabilities? I would say certainly the groups that I've named and many others that I've not had are pushed to the margins and are oftentimes discriminated against, especially in the context of, in an attempt to secure employment opportunities or accommodations even. And how are people with disabilities included in HR and IO work? I mean, there are many, there's the American Disabilities Act that of course influences organizational policy, or it should, and that's important, but as IOs, we have the ability to go far beyond just, ensuring in HR, of course, going far beyond just ensuring that these, there's compliance, but we could do the humane work of ensuring that there are training programs and additional resources that would meet the needs of these individuals, who are oftentimes, again, ignored. And so that is how I would respond to that question in short.
Alrighty. I'm not sure if Patricia wanted to add anything, but I also do encourage anyone else who has questions to please submit them now before we conclude the event. In the meantime, I'll let Patricia contribute.
Sure.
I saw you unmute yourself.
Well, I just, if you wanted to, I know, we're running out of time, but welcome other questions also. I mean, just having the recency of going through the past 18 months. I mean, I think, this is such a great question, is when you're going through the job analysis and compensation analysis and identifying knowledge, skills, and abilities, writing job descriptions in a way that attracts disabled Americans or qualified employees is so important, and something that IO psychologists can add to evaluating sort of their performance and, what's the right performance and reward and recognition systems, how to create it, that culture just for inclusivity of anyone that's marginalized. So I think there's a lot of value to add from an IO psychologist standpoint into that. I think, Michelle's point on accommodations and so today I laughed, Michelle, I don't know if you saw me, but today I had 3 different questions and every answer started with, it depends. And that's usually the right way to start an answer. So that's all I had to say.
Thank you for your contribution. It looks like there's no other questions in the Q&A box, so I'll take that as there are no more questions. Thank you so much to everyone for having joined us for today's event, or tuned in for our recording, which everyone will be receiving via email. Our lovely faculty and awesome guests are always ready to provide insight into the opportunities and the challenges in the IO psychology field. Whether you're advancing your career or expanding your suite of skills, our master's of Science or Master of Arts in Industrial Organizational Psychology degree is ready to provide you with the expertise to succeed in today's job market. So we look forward to seeing your names again at future event registrations, possibly even these panelists at future events, because you guys are super interesting, and I look forward to hearing your perspectives on more topics for sure. We look forward to seeing applications from our attendees as well. So thank you again, and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much
Thank you,
for
Liz.
having
Thanks,
us.
panelists. Yep.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Night.
All right. Thanks, Liz.
Anytime. Good
All right.
night.
Liz?
Yes. I was waiting until everybody left. Okay.
Still recording.
Oh, thank you. Stop.